This conference will now be recorded.
This is Diana with Richmond. I'm on.
Okay, I think we can get started.
Go ahead, Madam Chair.
All righty. Welcome, everyone. Before we get going too far, just want to remind people to mute their mics. And if you're not speaking, turn your camera off. We're wondering if that might help the situation that we experienced with the TPO meeting the other day where everything sort of crashed. But please turn your camera on when you're talking. I think it really helps people understand what you're talking about if they can see your face at the same time. So we'll get started with roll call and certification of a quorum. All right, we ask that everyone identify. Oh, I'm sorry. Do I need to read this part?
Yes, please.
Okay. We ask that everyone identify themselves first when speaking, so we can have a more accurate record of the activities of the meeting. All lines have been muted by the administrator to minimize additional noise and feedback. You may unmute your line at any time to request acknowledgement from the chair. Staff will be monitoring the chat throughout the meeting to assure we do not overlook anyone wishing to participate in the discussion. Please indicate your presence by saying aye when your name is called during roll call. Anyone who wishes to identify themselves following the roll call of members will be invited to do so. So Nicole, will you certify we followed the approved procedures for appropriate notice of this meeting and the means by which we're convening?
Yes, ma'am. I can certify that we have followed the approved procedures. And I will now go ahead and take attendance by roll call. I apologize, my video is not working this morning, so I'm not able to turn that on. We're going to go ahead with Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith.
Aye.
Ms. Faulkner. If you could please take a moment and just find your unmute button so you can turn on your microphone. I think I see Ms. Faulkner in attendance.
I'm here. Sorry about that.
Thank you. City of Richmond, Ms. Clark.
Aye.
Mr. Bridewell. Goochland County, Mr. Coleman. Mr. Kilduff. Hanover County, Mr. Vidunas.
Here.
Mr. Flagg. Henrico County, Ms. Smuggler.
Aye.
Mr. Yor. New Kent County, Ms. Leduc. Powhatan County, Mr. Pompey.
Aye.
Mr. Howland. Town of Ashland, Ms. Amos.
Aye.
Mr. Tucker. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge.
Aye.
GRT, Ms. Forrest.
Aye.
Ms. Del Ross.
Aye.
RMTA, Ms. Simmons. Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Aye.
Mr. Ariel.
Aye.
Right Finders, Ms. Tisdale. Mr. O'Keefe. Okay, I think I see him in attendance. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Aye.
Mr. Sparks. VDOT, Ms. McAdory.
Aye.
And Mr. Herman.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance.
Nicole, this is Chad. I see that Mr. Bridwell has joined. If you can acknowledge that verbally, Mr. Bridwell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so next on our agenda is the statement regarding virtual meetings. And I'll read through this. Thanks. Since the governor declared the state of emergency on March 12th, 2020, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, state and local government bodies have been providing for the continuity of government by meeting remotely by telephonic or electronic means in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, the Commonwealth's emergency and other applicable laws, guidance provided by the Attorney General and their respective legal counsel. On April 22nd, the General Assembly approved a budget amendment to authorize all public bodies, including regional bodies such as Plan RVA and the Richmond Regional TPO, likewise to meet by electronic means without a physical quorum assembled together during a governor-declared state of emergency, as long as certain conditions are met, so as to provide the continuity of governmental operations. The new authority is effective immediately. The bylaws of the RRTPO define a quorum of the body to be a majority of the TAC membership, which shall include at a minimum 4 of the local government representatives. The 2020 COVID-19 virus makes it impractical and unsafe, even potentially life-threatening for a quorum of this size to physically assemble in one location pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708.2A3. Further, the virus makes it impractical and unsafe for the public and the agency staff to gather in the same location to participate in this meeting. The health, safety, and welfare of our community is of paramount importance. Therefore, we have determined the appropriateness and eligibility to conduct today's meeting of the TAC electronically pursuant to the provisions of the Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708.2 and related legislation approved by the General Assembly of Virginia and in light of the Governor's State of Emergency Declaration for COVID-19. The convening of the TAC has been determined necessary in order to continue the necessary business of the organization. The matters included on the agenda address important, essential matters of continuing the work of government, and therefore it is appropriate to convene during this time. While we do not know the exact duration of the current practice of electronic meetings, we will continue to function in this manner until such time as it's deemed advisable to return to in-person meetings. At this time, we expect meetings to occur in electronic format through the current declaration or June 10th, tomorrow. Our RTPO staff have provided notice of this meeting and the means by which we are virtually gathered to members of the public. Notice was provided on June 2nd, 2020 through posting on the Plan RVA website and distribution of email notification to members, alternates, and known interested parties, including the media. In order to comply with the provisions of Virginia law and to improve accessibility to the discussions intended for today, this meeting will be recorded. Audio visual recordings of the meeting will be posted on the Plan RVA website within 48 hours of this meeting. Any members of the public wishing to address the TAC were invited to submit comments via email until the close of business one day prior to the meeting, in order to be reviewed and addressed during this meeting if necessary. Anyone participating as an observer during the meeting today may submit comments or questions at any time during the meeting via email at rrtpoinput@planrva.org or by using the online chat functions of the meeting platform. Those individuals who are observing by phone may be called upon to address the RRTPO with their questions or comments. All comments and questions submitted during the meeting will be reviewed following the meeting, and to the extent practical, responses may be provided or posted on the Plan RVA website. Does anyone have any questions regarding the process for assuring effective facilitation of this meeting or for how members of the public may participate? All right, hearing none, we'll go to the next item, which is procedures for electronic meetings. I think Chet's handling that one.
Yes, and the policy board at their last meeting on June 4th made the determination that this was not necessary to be read out loud. It's the same procedures that were discussed verbally at our last meeting in May, and it's also posted on the website for public review. So at this point, Madam Chair, we can move forward with the first agenda item.
Okay. So item number 1 is approval of today's meeting agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
This is Liz. So moved to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second by Joe Vidunas.
All right, I'll turn it over to Nicole.
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Folks to mute your mics. Okay. Go ahead.
The committee will now be voting on agenda item number 1, approval of RRTPO TAC meeting agenda. Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Mr. Bridewell.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Vidunas.
Aye.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
This
Who's
is
there?
Dirana. This is Dirana.
Good morning, Ms. Clark. I will mark you present. Thank you for letting me know.
Okay, I thought I was present with the original roll call.
I did mark you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Hanover County, Mr. Vidunas. I think he said aye. Moving along, Henrico County, Mrs. Smidler.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Pompey.
Aye.
Town of Ashland, Ms. Amos.
Aye.
CRAC, Mr. Rutledge.
Aye.
GRTC, Ms. Torres.
Aye.
Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Aye.
Right Finders, Mr. O'Keefe. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Aye.
And VDOT, Ms. McAdory.
Aye.
And I'm going to call City of Richmond, Ms. Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for item number 1.
Great. Thanks, everyone. The next item on the
Madam Chair, I believe I see that Mr. Coleman has joined us from Goochland. If we want to note that, Nicole.
Thank you.
Chet. I'm here.
All right, the next item on the agenda, item number 2, approval of the May 12th, 2020 PAC meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Sounds like it. Let's see if there's a motion for approval.
This is Andrew. I'll make a motion.
Thanks. A second?
Sharon Smidler, second.
All right, Nicole?
The committee will now be voting on item number 2, approval of May 12th TAC meeting minutes. Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Ms. Clark.
Aye.
Goochland County, Mr. Coleman.
Yay.
Hanover County, Mr. Vidunas.
Aye.
Henrico County, Ms. Smidler.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Pompey.
Aye.
Town of Ashland, Ms. Amos.
Aye.
CRAC, Mr. Rutledge.
Aye.
GRTC, Ms. Torres.
Aye.
Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Aye.
Right Finders, Mr. O'Keefe. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Aye.
VDOT, Ms. McAdory.
Aye.
That concludes the roll call for item number 2.
Okay. Moving on to item number 3, public comment period. Is there anyone who would like to provide comment to the TAC? Has anyone checked the chat?
I do not see any comments on the chat, and I also do not recall seeing any submittal of comments to our RRTPO input account.
Okay. All right. It looks like we can move on then to item number 4, the TAC chairman's report. I'll get myself on camera for that one. So I want to give everyone a brief update on the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. As we discussed last time, there was a small working group who worked to draft some bylaws, and those have been sent to the localities for comment. And I think we've gotten comments back from any of the localities wishing to suggest revisions or changes to those. So we're making good progress with bylaws and now have started working on transit governance. And the working group's expanded to include all the localities, and our next meeting is, we got an appointment yesterday for June 22nd at 2 o'clock. So check your email, make sure you've got that on your calendar, and make every effort to attend that meeting. We're trying to continue work to develop a schedule of work tasks to be done by the authority as soon as they hit the ground running, I guess is a better way to put it. We are trying to draft an agenda so that they will, at their first couple meetings, have a clear work plan in place and know some of the items that need to be addressed right away. Also, I think we mentioned this last time, or at least at the TPO meeting, we've approached Plan RVA to act as the interim administrator of the authority until the authority is able to get an executive director in place. So that's an update on that. Does anyone have any questions or anything you want to add? Okay, so next on the agenda is the TPO update with Chet.
Thank you very much. If you're able to see your screen, I've put the agenda item up, current work efforts update, item 5A. The Connect RVA Long Range Transportation Plan. We had a comment period on draft transportation needs list that was map-based, and that closed on May 20th. Those have all been, we're moving on from that and approaching the next phase, and Sulab will give an update on that further along in the agenda. The Transit Vision Plan is nearing completion. One thing that we are doing is working with our consultant, Kimley Horn, to come up with a story map and a way to better show that to the public and communicate the end results of this Transit Vision Plan near-term technical analysis. So expect that to come to TAC in a more presentable format later this summer. And we are also working, I think, concurrently with GRTC on the CBTA required regional transit plan. So our hope is that the Transit Vision Plan will feed into that and be a good resource to encourage development of that regional transit plan. The Trolley Line Trail Study and our bike ped planning efforts are moving forward, and Phil will give an update on that along with some of the complete streets work later on this morning. Smart Scale Round 4 is on the agenda today, and I think that is that's the extent of the current work efforts update. I think the other item to note is that the CTAC, the Community Transportation Advisory Committee, met in May, and the proceedings of that are included in the agenda drafted by Mr. Lance. If anyone has any questions, I believe Ken is here, so we can certainly address those. But I think the CTAC in general is working well, and I think they appreciate the interaction with TAC and the policy board, and we want to encourage that as much as possible. We had bigger plans for this year, for the summer, especially with CTAC, to do some field visits and other kinds of things to introduce them to some of the work that's being done around the region, and we hope to get back to that at some point, but obviously that's not happening right now. So I think that's it for the RRTPO update. Madam Chair, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Any questions? Okay, we'll move along to item 6 on the agenda, which is Smart Scale Round 4 Regional Project Selection. Shannon.
Sure. So as we all know, we have a total of 10 slots for regionally significant projects to be submitted as smart scale applications. The pre-application period for this round, Smart Scale Round 4, ended a while ago, and we submitted 12 applications to be pre-screened. Our duty now is to narrow that list down to 10 applications. The idea was that we would get feedback on the screening, the pre-screening from VDOT, so that decision can be easier made and based on metrics rather than opinion more than anything else. And that was supposed to happen before this meeting took place. As it turns out, with delays and issues related to the pandemic and work schedules, the pre-screening results are not yet public. So we are kind of in a holding pattern now. I think that in an ideal world, we would have been able to look at the pre-screening results prior to today's meeting and come up with recommendations for you on which 10 should move forward into the application window. As we look forward, the final applications are due on August 3rd. So if we work back from there, the policy board would need to approve the 10 applications at their July 2nd meeting. And they did at our last meeting. We encouraged them to hold their July meeting, and they are, so that they can take action on these smart scale applications. So I think that the discussion today needs to be, one, are we comfortable as an advisory committee coming up with a list of 10 based on what we know? If not, are we willing to get back together at some point once the pre-screening results are available and talk about the 10 projects then? I think it's kind of up in the air, and I was hoping to get some input from the membership on whether we should, what the next step should be. I think our end result is we need to have a recommendation to the policy board for their July meeting.
I had a question for Liz. I was wondering if, off the record, VDOT was able to tell us if any of these projects were likely to be screened out.
You can hear me, right, Barb? This is Liz. We don't
Liz, yeah.
So the district, we do our pre-screening first, but the final call is actually made by OIP. They have not yet completed their pre-screening. I reached out several times this week and last week to try to find out. I do have a hunch off the record that final decisions will be this week, because there's some conversations going on, and we've been asked to complete those conversations by COB tomorrow. But as far as actual results, we really don't know. Anything that could potentially be screened out from OIP even then goes to an executive working group. So I really can't give an actual answer. I apologize.
That's all right. And also to clarify, the screening is really just to say whether a project's eligible. We won't have any metrics to be looking at. It's my understanding. VDOT or OIP will just say, yes, this project's eligible and you can submit it. And we won't really get any other feedback, right?
This is Liz again. Actually, you will get, we have a new way to screen projects in. Your project can either be screened in fully or it can be screened in conditionally. And if a project is screened in conditionally, we'll have comments on what is needed to make the application eligible. And
Right.
additionally, if there's a project that is screened in, even if it's fully screened in, but there are maybe some things that could be stronger, we will give that feedback through the portal.
Okay, that's good.
Madam Chair, I guess I had one question for Liz while she's here. Is there any likelihood that the August 3rd date will be pushed back as well? I mean, that would make things a little easier.
Right. We've asked that question, and the answer at this point is no. But your guess is as good as mine. With the delays we've seen, I think it's possible. What I can promise is that I will relay the information to you all as soon as I know it. We do have a weekly call on Thursday, so I do expect to know more this Thursday.
Yeah, it does make it challenging for not only the TPO, but localities to get feedback from our board. They meet once a month, so trying to get feedback on which projects to move forward with, assuming that all that were submitted are eligible. Chet and I had talked about what we might do or suggest and to deal with this particular item before it goes to the TPO, so we can give them a recommendation, and wanted to get feedback from the group about having a special TAC meeting to deal just with this item once we have the pre-screen results back from OIP. I don't know that we have too many other options.
This is Joe Vidunas. I agree. I don't think we could really come to an informed decision right now. And unless somebody wants to volunteer to have their project removed, I think we are best served to delay this.
Okay. Any other feedback or suggestions for how to deal with selecting the 10? Do we need a motion to say that we'll hold a special TAC meeting to deal with this particular agenda item?
I think that would certainly help, yes.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I'm
Sorry.
sorry, we don't have specifics on a date or anything, but we can nail that down after the meeting's over.
So it sounds like we won't know even today. It's going to be close of business tomorrow at the earliest.
And this is Liz again. That's nothing formal. That was just what I'm gathering from some of the conversations that are going around. Again, I do expect to know Thursday, so I could get back with you guys then.
Okay. All right. Is there a motion to hold a special TAC meeting to deal with Smart Scale Round 4 project selection?
So moved. This is Dirana.
Thanks, Dirana. Is there a second?
Second by Joe Vidunas.
Nicole, will you go through the vote?
Yes, ma'am. I'll go ahead and take the roll call. The committee will not be voting on item number 6 for a special TAC meeting on Smart Scale Round 4. Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Ms. Clark.
Aye.
Richland County, Mr. Coleman.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Vidunas.
Aye.
Henrico County, Ms. Meidler.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Pompey.
Aye.
Town of Ashland, Ms. Amos.
Aye.
CRAC, Mr. Rutledge.
Aye.
GRTC, Ms. Torres.
Aye.
Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Aye.
Right Finders, Mr. O'Keefe.
Aye.
DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Aye.
And VDOT, Ms. McAdory.
Aye.
And that concludes the roll call, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, item number 7 is FY21 through FY26 RSTP CMAQ allocations discussion by Miles. Take it away, Miles.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So as the chair just mentioned, this is just a discussion item today. We're not asking for action on the allocation, so I just want to preface everything with that. So what I wanted to do today was go a little bit through the guidance that we have, kind of where we are with our allocations currently, what we're proposing, and then I have a couple discussion areas that I just wanted to open it up to TAC for some feedback. What we're looking for today is some guidance on any changes, any new direction from what's been proposed. So in terms of state level guidance, we have a little bit with respect to RSTP CMAQ. The main guidance comes from the budget. So Section 430 of the state budget says essentially that funds have to be obligated within 12 months of allocation and expended within 36 months of obligation. So that's the main guidance that we have that essentially states we should be matching our allocations with our project schedules. The second big piece is the Ctb Six-Year Program. So basically they're adopting allocations to cover 6 years. That plan is updated annually to reflect the changes to cost and schedule. That trickles down to us at the MPO level, and we're also adopting 6 years worth of allocations at a time. So where we are today, there's some front loading on our projects, which means that the funding is not matched up with the schedules and is coming in earlier years than it's actually needed. And we have large balances in the later out years, and we have almost no balance left over in the early years to help cover any cost overruns. So I've got an example project, and then we'll look at the overall RSTP program. So at the project level, this is one that I pulled out. This is a Goochland County project, and Tom, this isn't anything in particular with Goochland. This was just one that I found that was an easy example. So you can see that PE is scheduled for 23, right away for 26, and construction for 27. And we have about $5.5 million on the project. And the actual allocations run from 21 to 25. So you can see we've got funding in consecutive years, and the funding doesn't match up with that schedule that's in pool or in the SIP. So at the system level, what this translates into, as I mentioned, is a limited balance in those earlier years and large balances in excess of 30% in some of the later out years. So we're not really making use of all the funding in the 6 years. We're really heavily drawing on the first couple years. The other piece in FY26, you can see we have nothing penciled in there because we aren't really documenting the next phase. It is something that we're planning to allocate, but it's not anywhere documented, so we don't have that commitment kind of penciled in yet. So what we're proposing with the new draft that you have before you is to allocate the funds more directly based on the phase and the project schedule. So we would also track the funding beyond year 6 for future phases of selected projects to ensure that we're accounting for money that needs to be provided at those later years. And then we would allocate a consistent balance entry, which was 5% that we have penciled in, to ensure that we have funding for cost overruns or if the available allocation is reduced. And then really what this means in practice is for projects with multiple phases, for future funding cycles, year 6 would be the new year 1. So you'd be looking at a longer time period out before you could get a new project. So this draws from the practice in Hampton Roads and to some extent from FAMPO, so from the Fredericksburg area, on how they're handling their allocations. So looking at that same project that we had before, the $5.5 million, this matches up the schedule, and this is what's in the draft plan now, but it matches up the schedule. So the PE funding is provided in the year that PE is planned to start. The right-of-way funding is directly in the year that the right-of-way is planned. So it frees up a lot of the money that we had in the earlier years that wasn't necessarily needed, so that we can put those on other projects. And then moving on beyond year 6, we also have a table of future commitments. So this would be the construction phase of the project in FY27. We know that it's going to take 2 years, so we're able to split it over a couple years, which is necessary, especially for the more expensive phases of projects. And the benefit to this is it does allow us to know next year when we go to do funding that in FY27, we only have a certain amount of money left over, so everyone can plan better for what projects make the most sense given what's available for the new phase of PE or the new round of PE funding. And then the other benefit is that as the project sponsors, you all would know exactly how much funding we're committing for those future years. And instead of having to come back and say, hey, remember, we need extra construction for this year or anything along those lines, you would know that we already have it penciled in for you. So at the system level, this is kind of what we're proposing. So you can see the 5% target balance on this third line across the board. With the commitments and allocations, we have an actual balance. And you can see in the later years, it's a little bit higher. So we weren't able to get all the way down to that 5%, but it's a lot less than what we had initially with the 30 and 40% in those later out years. As I mentioned before, this does then say that year 6 will generally be the new year for future project selection. The exception to that is for studies, TDM programs, things that are kind of one-off funding that don't require multiple phases. We're still able to use whatever previous funding is available. So everything before year 1 could then be applied to those. So it would work out still that you could address the immediate needs immediately, but it would push out construction type projects to farther out with this approach. So the benefits to the approach from the way that staff use it, the funds would be obligated and expended on time. We would be matching that state schedule, which means we would reduce our risk of losing our state match and also rescission because we would be obligating quickly. Available funding will be easily estimated for the future years, so we can tell you before we go into an application cycle how much money is left over for new project selection, which will help you not to put in more applications than was really worth the effort. We also have that documented TPO commitment, so you know that if you have a future phase that's coming up in the new year, it'll already be accounted for. And then the allocations will be generally handled in-house. Because this is simplifying the process and we're really only looking at year 6 and beyond for the new allocations, we'll be able to shorten it and only bring VDOT in as we need, rather than having to work with VDOT extensively to rework the tables every year. So it should help us to speed up our overall selection process. So that's kind of what we're proposing right now. So what I wanted to do was go through just the discussion and open it up. We've got existing projects and we can address any questions or concerns with those, new projects, and then specifically we have a section about ride finders as well. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions, or otherwise we can start working through the discussion. And I think Joe had a question.
Yes, thanks, Miles. Can you go back to that the initial Guideline slide where it showed the original schedule and the funding outlay?
Sure. So this is the original schedule. So this is what's in pool in the SIP currently. So you see it's PE in 23, right away in 26, and construction in 27. And
Okay.
this is where we have the allocations. So essentially PE funding is in 21 and 22, right away is in 23, and construction's in 24 and 25.
Right, stop there. So my question would be this is, why wouldn't Guideline just begin the PE phase in 21 as opposed to pushing things out to 23, because the funding is available to start earlier, 2 years earlier?
Sure. So that may be the goal with this one, would be to fund it earlier, and that is a great valid question. But this is an example just where the schedule that's been presented, the schedule that VDOT has in the system, isn't matching up with what we have allocated. So there's a mismatch between the schedule and funding. So the goal with the way we rebalanced all of this working with VDOT was to match up the schedules that are in pool and in the SIP with how we have the funding. So if the goal was to start the project in 21, it should be in the system as 21 start date for PE as opposed to a 23 start date.
Well, oftentimes it's the money that drives the schedule, but in this case, the money allows it to be done sooner. So, I mean, I think if I were in Goochland's shoes, I would be advocating to have the project begun in 21. But that was my comment.
Yeah, I agree. A question I had for you, Miles, was, you know, we often will split the construction allocations over years. And the way that this is set up, it's doing the same thing for PE. And I think there's a benefit to doing that. You know, I know this isn't the tip, but allocating, you're not going to spend all 700,000 of the PE money in FY23. So you may as well spread that out over some years too.
Sure, and our original drafts, we did that, so that's something that we could easily go back and do. So splitting this 729 over the 3 years. The reason we didn't was basically both ways are consistent with the guidance that it needs to be obligated and then expended within the 3 years. We felt that we could approach it either direction, and that's one of those items where we're happy to change it up if TAC thinks it's better to spread it out. Were there any other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Another question I had was the 5% balance across all 6 years. We used to ramp that up, you know, so the actual year we would program all the money. And then the next year would be small, you know, a small balance. And then out in the 6th year, we would have a larger balance. And by ramping it up, we had an opportunity to get projects started sooner than that 6th year. I'm not a big fan of being forced into waiting until year 6 to start projects. It's not good with our elected officials either. You know, they're around for 4 years and, you know, maybe more, but 4 years for sure. And they want to see projects get started.
Sure. And so that's actually one of the discussion questions I have under the new project about how far out we want to actually take this approach. So maybe we can just work through the questions that I had set up and kind of go from there, unless there's any other big picture questions right now. So first off, with the existing projects, basically what we were asking, is there a concern with balancing the funding to match the pool schedules? For most projects, we tried to match with what was in pool currently. There were a handful of projects where we knew that the locality had a different schedule, such as the Atlee Station project, where pool has, the dates haven't been set yet. So we knew that there was a slightly different schedule from the locality, so we adjusted for those. But overall, are there any concerns with rebalancing the funding to match the schedules?
I think in any instance that the pool schedule is not matching the allocations, resulting in a delay in getting started, just like we were talking about with that Goochland example, you need to pull the locality in and have a conversation about that.
So following up on that, if any of the localities have a specific project that they think is not being served by this approach, I would ask that you email us by the 19th, which is a week from Friday, so we can start putting together the list of here's the specific projects that we have concerns that have come from TAC, and work with VDOT on the programming for those. I will say that this approach that we've taken to the allocations is consistent with how VDOT does theirs. And Liz, please feel free to jump in. But Liz and Larry really helped us out to make sure that we were balancing out the allocations so that they were matching up. But I do understand the concern of if money's already in place, maybe the project should be starting sooner.
Miles, I don't really have anything to say other than, I think it might be worthwhile for me to go back and talk with our IID folks to find out what the true implications are of either way. And then when you and Larry and I discuss before you go back to TAC, I think I'll have a better answer as far as that goes.
Any other concerns with the existing projects that we need to know about? Okay. So the next piece was the new projects. When we requested applications last year, the applications were specified that we wanted it in 2019 or FY20 dollars. So what we've done is we've taken a 2.5% inflation to the phase start, which is the same approach used in Smart Scale. So if your PE wasn't until 2023, we had to add 3 years of inflation onto the cost to make sure that it was accurate and reflecting the cost changes over time. Are there any concerns with that approach of how we've taken those? I know it's been raised about splitting the phase costs over the years. Were there any other concerns with the general overall approach to that inflating as we went?
Miles, Joe Vidennis
I
again.
think that makes it.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
No, I apologize. This is difficult. So Miles, so along those lines, I would only caution that some of our estimates are already factoring in inflationary cost. I think Smart Scale may be doing that. I don't know. They've gone back and forth, it seems, but we just don't want to double up that inflationary cost. So that would be something you need to check before we do just flatly apply it.
Yes, and when we went through the initial project meetings with everyone, we did ask whether the costs were in current dollars or future dollars. So that was or should have been accounted for through that. Like I know, Joe, I believe your project was in a year of expenditure rather than in the current cost. So we didn't give you extra on your project, but it is something we can go back through and double check on all the projects.
Miles, I really like asking folks for current day costs. And then when you're programming, you're able to figure out, okay, I can do it in a year, or it's going to take 5 years, and you add the inflation accordingly. I think that makes a lot of sense.
So then
are there any other comments on the? Go ahead.
Well, back to the other big question that you raised before then, and this is another area we need direction from TAC, is to how far should we go out with the allocation? So the approach we've laid out goes through all 6 years. I know, as you mentioned, there's concerns that might be too far out. With this approach, it's easy. We can just back out anything that has PE after a certain point and pull off those projects. But then the question is how far does TAC want to go out in terms of allocating the funds?
Yeah, you've probably dangled this candy in front of us. We've got these projects programmed and it looks really nice at this point. I don't know if that's something I can comment on right now, but I definitely don't like the idea of having to wait in the next round, having to wait until the 6th year to get a project on the books. Are there any other comments about that? Do other folks remember the old process of ramping up that balance as you went across the 6 years?
I mean, I recall that. What you're referring to is keeping a larger balance in the out years.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
So we had more flexibility in programming.
personally, I like that practice.
So I guess, from our perspective, the reason that the 6 years and going through and allocating it makes sense is when we get to a new SIP and a new funding cycle, year 6 is really the new year. That's the only year that we haven't seen before. So it really makes sense to treat that as the new year from the programming side. I understand from the project scheduling, it might make sense to have a little more flexibility. So I think there's a way we could set a limit and do something similar to the ramping up. But I don't know if we want to leave as much as we have on the table, because like I mentioned, this is 30 to 40% of the funding is still unallocated in these later out years. So that's a lot left sitting on the table that could be advancing projects.
Well, you're not advancing them if you're sitting around waiting for that year to show up.
Sure. So what we can do, if you'd like, we can prepare a table that follows both of the approaches for new projects. So we'll take all of the existing projects as the same baseline for either, and we can prepare it with one ramping up and one, as we've shown you now with the draft, which allocates across all 6 years. And then TAC can see both of them and make a decision next time on which is preferable for the allocation.
How's that sound to everyone?
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion, because I think it's really hard to see and understand this stuff until you actually apply it. This is so complex because there's so many moving pieces, and this program is just one of the several funding programs that we deal with, and we're trying to tap into and leverage and try to make the thing, try to piece together funding, and it's complicated. And I think the more flexibility that we allow ourselves, I think the easier it is to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, this is Sharon with Henrico, and I agree with what Joe's saying about flexibility, and Miles had mentioned about, comparing those two options and showing that to the group. I think just the flexibility to be able to move like maybe a one project or so on a case-by-case basis, if we need to move it up in funding, to have the flexibility to do that would be great. And timing is also important, because I'm also thinking with these smart scale applications coming up and trying to, sorry, I should turn on the camera, and trying to buy down the costs of the smart scale application. So like Henrico has a few RSTP CMAQ applications, and it would be nice to be able to say we had committed funding right now, but I don't think we can, since it hasn't gone to the TPO. But that would help us in the future. And the other one was, I know, Miles, you may be getting to this, but the spreadsheets, they were like color coding on it. I think that are you going to get to that in a little bit?
Sure. Basically, the color coding was by phase. So that was just easy for our tracking to make sure we were matching up our phase costs. But I think it also just helps it. So it was basically the orange or red color was your PE, the yellow was your right of way, and the green was the construction phase of the project. So it's just easy for tracking and visualizing and making sure that everything's matching up.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So same as with the existing projects, if you have any specific concerns about any of the new projects, please send us an email. That way we can account for that when we're preparing the revised tables for the next TAC meeting. So the final piece for this discussion today, and I know this has been a little long, is related to ride finders. So as you're all probably aware, the project selection guidelines, when they revised in 2014, stated that ride finders should significantly reduce the operation cost or expenses that come from TPO allocations by 2020. So you can see here's a table based on the annual reports and our allocations that they have reduced by about 10% the amount of their operating expenses that are coming from our allocations. With that, we're looking for a little bit of guidance on what to do with Ride Finders allocations. So the program is regularly our top scoring CMAQ candidate. There's not a lot of other sources of funding available for a nonprofit TDM program like this. And we have allocations through FY22, both currently approved and in the draft right now. We have enough surplus balance beyond the 5% that we could easily go out to 24, or with a little reworking, we could do it through all the way through 26. We're just looking for a little bit of direction on what you think is the best approach, given that we have those project selection guidelines. So open that up for any discussion or any thoughts on this.
Is that someone commenting?
This is Diana.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, even though I know that, you know, in our heads, we've already tried to spend the CVTA transit allocation already, but I don't know if some of that regional funding could assist Ride Finders, and is there consensus by the group that less money should be going to Ride Finders? And then I think those are just a couple of questions or things to think about in trying to figure out, you know, what we can do with them.
I'm supportive of continuing CMAQ funding going to Ride Finders. I think it is an appropriate fit for that funding source. So that's sort of where I am with that. Any other comments?
Well, this is Chad. I think that Miles has done a ton of research, and we've looked back through old minutes and that kind of thing, but I don't think there's many folks on staff that were that understand the context for the last decision back in 2014 on why that was implemented. So I think we were hoping to, if anything, learn more about it, and if there's still even a need for that kind of decision to take place.
Yeah, because I'm not sure. I wasn't around 2014, but as far as in the Richmond region, but I know having been in other parts that work with Ride Finders, they have done a great job in improving their presentation of their operations and being able to present data. So I've seen that change over the years since 2014. So it may have been some of the groups or the board, whomever voted, if the TPO policy board at that time, kind of was a cry out for you have to do better. So again, I think they have improved and that they are really a good source for the region, and that the CMAQ funds, that they're one of the programs that truly meet the intent of the CMAQ program. So I definitely think that, and if they've done a 10% reduction, maybe we revisit having to reduce them any further or eliminating the funding.
Yeah, I agree with that, you know, maybe we leave it where it is and program it out for the 6 years.
Okay, so it sounds like what we can do then is we'll do 3 years like we've always done for the program that's ramping up the balance over the years. And then for the version that does all 6 years, we'll just program it out across all 6.
Okay.
Are there any other comments on the Ride Finders allocations? All right. Thank you.
Well, that's everything I had for you guys. So like I said, if you have any comments or concerns about any of the existing or new projects, please send me an email by next Friday, the 19th, so we can take those into consideration. We're going to work with Larry and with Liz to revise these tables and bring them back to you. Since we don't have a firm date on reopening up the SIP yet, there's no real rush, but we're going to try and get it back to you so that you can at least get to review it and make a recommendation so we can advance it whenever we are able to open things back up.
Okay. Thanks, Miles.
Thank you.
All right. Next on our agenda is RSDP CMAQ selection guidelines update. So, Miles.
Sure. So this one's going to be much shorter. Basically, in the UPWP for next year, we have a task to update the project selection guidelines. So our guidelines were initially adopted in 2004. We've had a few revisions over the years, but we haven't really gone back and comprehensively looked at the program and made sure that it's still meeting the region's needs. So what staff is proposing is an update to look at several different areas. One would be making sure that we're matching up and using the same data-driven process in our RSDP CMAQ program as we're using for the long-range plan. One area would be leveraging. The guidelines support leveraging, but it doesn't really say anything in terms of how we're going to handle it. And now that there's new sources of funding in the region, we want to make sure that we have it well planned and implemented. Another piece would be incorporating TA funding. So we don't have the transportation alternatives program guidance anywhere. So making sure that we include that as another regional source of funding that we have guidance and direction on. And then the last piece is really just improving our ability to track the program. So looking at ways that we can ensure that at the TPO level, we're tracking the project and making sure that we can report out to the public and to the policy board accurately. So it's kind of a little bit of everything. So we thought it was best to just look at the whole plan and figure out what would be the best approach moving forward. What we're asking for today is for TAC to set up a subcommittee to guide this process. Our recommendation is a 5-member subcommittee, 2 from the urban jurisdictions, 2 from the rural, and GRTC to represent transit. But we're happy to include others if you feel that there's a better mix that would provide better outcomes. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or otherwise looking for suggestions on people who would want to be on the board.
Anybody have any questions for Miles? And do we have any volunteers?
Hey, this is Liz McAdory with VDOT. I'm not sure if you guys are planning to have both VDOT and DRPT on, but we would be willing to participate either on the committee or as background providing of information.
Yes, I failed to mention that, but we do have you guys listed as an advisory role, so not voting on the guidelines, but providing support as needed.
Perfect.
Barb, Joe Vidunas, I'd be happy to work on the committee.
Great, Joe. Thank you.
And this is Sharon. I'm happy to help out and work on the committee with Henrico.
Great. So that's 2 urban, right? That's Hanover, I guess. What are you, Joe? Are you urban or rural?
We're not urban, but we're not rural. So we would be in the urban category.
Okay. So do we have any rural volunteers?
Yeah, this is Tom from Goochland. I'd be willing to help out.
Thanks, Tom. Anyone else?
Would love to.
Uh-oh, someone said they'd love to?
No, I said this is Dirana, and if you have an urban spot, we would like to.
I think we've got 2 urbans, but what do you think,
If we can't fill the slot, maybe we can. You know, I know, you know, having worked in the rural localities, it's a lot of time commitment already with the TPO. So if we can't fill it, I think we'd be happy to fill it with another urban locality.
We'll just call Hanover rural.
Yeah, okay.
This is Nora. I'd be okay to count Hanover as rural. I was going to volunteer if you didn't have anyone, but I was going to do it if I could have someone else fill in for the Vision Zero committee from my department. But if Joe and Dirana want to do it, I'm good with that too.
Okay. And then we're roping Adrian into it, transit.
Adrian had to step off the call, but this is Emily. We'd be happy to help.
Great. Thank you, Emily. All right. I think we've got a good batch of volunteers.
Okay, perfect. And then we were requesting action on this, which would just be to set up the subcommittee with those 5 representatives.
Okay. Do we have a motion? We should, let's see, our 5 people, Joe, Tom, Dirana, Darren, Adrian, and Nora, maybe? Did I get everyone?
Tom.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a motion to set up our subcommittee for CMAQ and RSTP selection guideline process update?
Sharon Smidler, so moved.
Is there a second?
John
O'Keefe.
Okay. Nicole, will you go through the vote?
I can. May I ask real quick who did the second on this item, on this motion?
John O'Keefe, I seconded it.
Thank you. The committee will now be voting on item number 8, RSTP CMAQ selection guidelines. Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Ms. Clark.
Aye.
Goochland County, Mr. Coleman.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Vidunas.
Aye.
Henrico County, Ms. Smidler.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Pompey.
Aye.
Town of Ashland, Ms. Amos.
Aye.
CRAC, Mr. Rutledge. GRTC, Ms. Torres.
Adrian had to step off, but this is Emily. Aye.
Thanks, Ms. Del Ross. Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Aye.
Ride Finders, Mr. O'Keefe.
Aye.
DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Aye.
And VDOT, Ms. McAdory.
Aye.
That concludes the roll call for item number 8.
Thank you. All right, so moving on to item number 9, which is the 2020 Richmond Regional Structural Inventory and Assessment Report. Sulab is going to give us a presentation on that.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to discuss about the Richmond Regional Structural Inventory and Assessment Report, which is basically the update of 2015 report. TAC hasn't heard about this subject in the last 5 years, but I think it was a good time for us to update this report before the long range transportation plan. RRTPO began tracking the regional structures since 2014. At that time, there were a lot of structures in poor condition, as well as a lot of structures in the region were aging. So I think we started to track them from that time. This inventory and assessment is based on VDOT's database of structures, which is basically available by construction district. And we just filtered out the 9 localities of the Richmond region to see the data. The data is a snapshot from January 15th of 2020, because the database is updated every day. Whenever there's a new inspection for the bridge, the database is updated. So this is just a snapshot of data from January 15th. Things might have changed from that as well. We'll also be looking at the Commonwealth State of Good Repair prioritization process for replacement and rehabilitation of structures. This was I think around 2018 approved by CTB, and now it's also in the state code. So working with Liz from the district will be just documenting this so that it becomes clear for us how the prioritization process works. We'll also list out the prioritized list. So there's, I think, a list created every year. First, there's a list of bridges which are eligible for prioritization, and then the list of bridges which actually gets the funding. And it's divided into two categories, one for VDOT owned bridges, and then the other one is for locality owned bridges. Structures with poor conditions, we already fed that into Connect RVA 2045 plan in our issues list. And in phase 3, which is the universal project, we'll be looking those projects in the state of good repair funding for pot. There would be some criteria which we'll be establishing for screening these projects. Not all bridges would be in that document. So structures inventory basically includes bridges, culverts, and tunnels. We don't have any tunnels in the Richmond region. It includes all the structures maintained by VDOT. There are other bridges which are maintained by other localities, as well as public agencies, private entities. The list doesn't include federal bridges. I think we don't have any federal bridges out in Richmond. My understanding is that as we go east, there are a few federal bridges in Hampton Road area. So all bridges, regardless of their length, is included in this inventory. Culverts, large culverts of having an opening greater than 36 square feet, which is basically dimension 6 by 6. Overpasses, flyovers, and at-grade ramps, also considered bridges. And then a bridge might have more than one structure. For example, like if bridge has two structures, eastbound and westbound, or northbound and southbound parts, those are counted as two structures. Example would be Mayor Bridge, the bridge in Route 288. So this is the summary of the regional structures. So we have, based on the snapshot from January 15th, we have 1428 structures in the Richmond region, 818 bridges, and then 610 culverts. So if we look at the structures by ownership, most of the bridges are owned by and maintained by VDOT. Like that's like almost 85%. City of Richmond and Henrico secondary system road bridges are maintained by the individual jurisdiction. We have a culvert which is maintained by Chesterfield County as well as the town of Ashland. And then we have railroad owned bridges. I think we had 4 bridges previously, but the Norfolk Southern bridges are now transferred to VDOT. So we just have 2 CSX bridges left. Then we have bridges maintained by RMTA, basically in the downtown expressway, as well as the famous Penny Bridge. And then Route to 895, which was earlier maintained by Transurban. I think now it's maintained by Global Via. So that's 23 bridges in that. This map shows the bridges and culverts owned and maintained by VDOT. So we can see in the urban area, it mostly follows the main routes. But as we go out to the rural areas, we can see smaller bridges and culverts which don't follow the, they obviously follow routes, but not the main routes. This shows the bridges and culverts owned by other entities, not VDOT. So we can see GloVivia maintained bridges and culverts around 895. RMTA maintained bridges and culverts in Downtown Expressway, as well as the bridges and culverts maintained by Henrico County, as well as the city. So the inspection and rating of bridges, VDOT is responsible for the inventory and inspection of all bridges and culverts, irrespective of who owns or maintains the bridges. The inspection is done by VDOT staff. It's inspected in accordance of to the National Bridge Inspection Standards. So that's something that's a federal guidance which the state has to follow. So the inspection interval is, I think, 2 years for the bridges and then 4 years for large culverts, with an average of like 3 years in which most of the structures would be inspected. If the structure is in poor condition, I think they have more frequent intervals for inspection. So to understand the condition of the bridges, we need to know the 3 main components of the bridge. So the first one is deck, which is basically the riding surface in which the vehicles are driven. The second one is superstructure, which is the support immediately beneath the driving surface, basically the beam. And then finally the substructure, which is the foundation and supporting post and piers. So these are the main 3 components of a bridge. A culvert, there's just one element of the culvert, the whole culvert. So the general conditions rating is a numeric scale in which they inspect the bridge and the culverts. So each component has a separate general condition rating. So for bridges, there would be 3 different general condition rating for each of the components: the deck, the superstructure, and substructure. For culvert, it's just one. So if any of the components of the bridge has a general condition rating of 4 or less, it's considered in poor condition, also known as structurally deficient bridge. So structurally deficient bridges, which has a general condition rating 4 or less, so they are normally restricted to light vehicles close to traffic or require rehabilitation. It basically means that one or other element of the bridge needs to be repaired. Just calling it structurally deficient doesn't mean that it's likely to collapse or it's unsafe for use. Sometimes if the general condition rating decreases over to 3 or 2, the bridges are structurally deficient bridges are posted with reduced weight limits, so that it'll be only allowing certain weights vehicles to travel. So this is the structurally deficient bridges in the Richmond region. Out of 1428 structures, 65 are structurally deficient now. Richmond, since it has a lot of old inventory, 10% of the structures are structurally deficient. Similarly, Charles City, we have 10% of bridges structurally deficient. If we look at the structures by ownership, again, 10% of all the City of Richmond maintained structures are structurally deficient. The new facilities like the Route 895, we don't see any structurally deficient structures there. And then VDOT, 4.4% of the total structures. So that's less than the regional average. So structurally deficient bridges, it's 4.6%. And I looked at the last updated database we did in 2015. So at that time, we had 110 structurally deficient bridges. That's 7.8% at that time. So there has been a good progress in rehabilitating these structurally deficient structures in the Richmond region over the last 5 years. So all structurally deficient bridges are listed in the Connect RVA 2045 needs inventory, but there would be certain selection criteria. The first is that we can only include structurally deficient bridges, which would be inside the RRTPO metropolitan planning area boundary. So anything outside the boundary, we can't include those. The other would be we are only looking at important bridges. So bridges which are listed in NBI, all these bridges are listed in NBI, which is the National Bridge Inventory. But bridges which are also located in NHS, which is the National Highway System, I think those would be the projects which gets the cut in Long Range Transportation Plan. So these are the structurally deficient bridges and culverts in the Richmond region. We still can see some culverts in I-95 which needs some kind of rehabilitation, but it's spread throughout the region. I can see a lot of bridges in the rural area as well. And these are the weight posted bridges. We have 44 bridges now, which are weight posted. Chesterfield and Hanover have most weight posted bridges, 9 each. And as the structurally deficient bridges, these are spread mostly in the rural areas, outlying areas, but we can see a few bridges in Richmond as well. So the next step is to work with VDOT district, with Liz, and if needed, Central Office Bridge Division to understand and document the Commonwealth State of Good Repair. So it's the prioritization process is already there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to document that so that we have a better understanding of what the process is. And also get the prioritized list for VDOT owned and locality owned structures in the Richmond region. Most likely FY21 if that's done, and then see how our analysis based on what we have done and how the funding shows up. Just try to make a connection between those two. Once that's done, we'll develop a jurisdictional profile for each locality, for the 9 localities. So we'll have inventory for each locality as well as mapping of the bridges. And once that's done, we'll ask the TAC for approval of the document. And once the TAC approves it, it will go to the policy board for approval. And that's all I have. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Anyone have any questions for Sulab? All righty. Thank you, Sulab.
Thank you.
Connect RVA 2045 update. So Sulab, can you provide us with that update?
Yeah, I'll be updating about the Connect RVA 2045 progress. Most of the TAC members are in the LRTPAC advisory committee, so I'm not taking much time for being repetitive. So I'll just provide a brief update. So most of you have seen this process flow chart. The LRTP has 6 distinct phases. The transportation needs assessment, strategic direction, in which we look at the goals, visions, and then planning, in which we have established a universe of projects. The 4th phase is programming, in which we prioritize and rank the universe of projects. And then finally, since it's a performance-based plan, we evaluate what the projects are in our constrained list of projects, mainly doing the accessibility as well as environmental justice analysis, as well as looking at the what we did in our public outreach. And then finally, it's the adoption, which is targeted for September 2021. by the RRTPO policy board, and which will go to FTA and FHWA after that. And then we also have a parallel scenario planning process. We haven't started on that, so I'm thinking that it won't be robust this time, but we would do some kind of academic exercise to be included in the plan. So now the first phase, transportation needs assessment, it's almost done. The first task was to update the socioeconomic data as well as the analysis report, which we are calling 2045 long-range transportation, long-range growth forecast analysis, which was completed in May, and TAC was given a presentation on May as well. Second is task 1.1, Richmond Tri-Cities travel demand model. It was again completed in May 2020, and it's going to be a good, important tool to be used in the whole process. The final is the most important task within this phase, the transportation needs assessment. This is complete, and the inventory was approved by the LRTPAC on the last meeting on May 28th. So basically what we did was we just identified the transportation needs assessment based on the regional and local multimodal transportation issues based on congestion, safety, lack of interconnectivity, operational problems, maintenance issues, inadequate roadway transit capacity, transit expansion, accessibility, and then other issues like travel demand management, system resiliency, and economic development, and then establish LRTP specific regional transportation needs. So this was basically done by staff review of regional and local plans and studies, including the I-95 corridor studies, the IJRs and IMRs conducted by VDOT, the STAR studies, as well as other regional transportation projects, including transit. Also looked at the various projects which RRTPO is currently doing. Some of them have been complete, some of them are still ongoing, and also looked at the locality comprehensive plan, small area plan, as well as transportation plan. The other part was we did a Richmond Tri-Cities travel demand runs to see what kind of capacity issues would be in the future, and those deficient links or corridors have been listed in the issue identification inventory as well. Thirdly, the LRTPAC additions based on the comments provided by the LRTP advisory committee based on their local knowledge, as well as being subject matter experts in different modes of transportation. And then finally, we got public input based on the Wikimap website map application, which we had placed in our dedicated website for Connect RV 2045. We were also able to hold a few community meetings before the ongoing pandemic. So based on those meetings, we also got some input. All these were included in the public input, which amounted for almost 135 issues. So the LRTP advisory committee was sent the issue on April 1st, that this is the final draft, which had listed LRTP specific issues, VTRAN issues, and other issues like program, policy needs, or transportation studies, or the issues which we deemed to be local in nature. Then public comments, as I mentioned, from mid-February to April 15th, 2 months period, got 135 comments from Wikimaps as well as community meetings. One of our CTAC members also forwarded us the real estate agents transportation survey of the Richmond region, which provided us important information as well. So those were listed in the inventory as well. So finally, we got 1,089 issues listed in the inventory, which went to the formal public review period from May 5th to May 20th, which is 15 days as suggested in our public engagement plan. We received 11 comments on the website. Comments which were directly related to the issue inventory have been addressed. Other comments which might be related to vision, goals, or any other part of the plan would be addressed during the course of the plan. This was presented to LRTP Advisory Committee, and the Advisory Committee approved the inventory on May 20th, 2020, which is the last time they had a meeting. So the next step is moving forward to phases 2 and 3, development of vision, goals, and objectives, which is phase 2. Staff is working to create a goals survey which would be posted online so that we can get an input from the public. So this is still on development. At the same time, the requirement were introduced to the LRTP Advisory Committee in the first meeting. So we probably would have a couple of meetings to discuss about this. The other one which we'd be working on is the third phase of conversion of issues into transportation projects. Staff drafted a guideline for a project inclusion, which was sent to LRTP Advisory Committee for their comments. So once that's been finalized, staff would be screening the issues and then converting it to transportation projects. Staff would require VDOT and DRPT as well as the LRTP Advisory Committee members in this phase, as we need might need conceptual sketches. We need the cost estimate and the date in which we think that the project should be completed. So that's all what is going on. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Sulab? Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is the Regional Bike Ped Plan Update and Complete Streets Toolbox. And Phil's going to give us the presentation on that.
Good morning, everybody. Excuse me. Hoping that this pops up. Everybody see the active transportation screen now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, so I thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this morning. And I just want to give a progress report for our Richmond Regional Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan, and also for our Complete Streets efforts. Excuse me, there's something blinking here, so I'm going to clear that. Okay. So we have two story maps we've been developing. Our staff has been working on. You guys, many of you have been working with our active transportation work group and our steering committee for the bicycle and pedestrian plan. So you've probably seen this active transportation story map, but it really covers, you know, all over the region. We are trying to use this as part of what Sulab was describing with the Connect RVA 2045 plan. This is part of our effort to document all of the infrastructure for bicycle and pedestrian in the region. And, you know, as we were saying, we've met with each locality individually. We've been working with the staff to collect information on all of the GIS information to help develop this particular map. And as we'll continue to develop maps for our, not just for online, but also for our the actual document as we create that bicycle and pedestrian plan, which we hope to complete by the end of this calendar year. So, but we've been, you know, gathering all of the information on each type of infrastructure, and we've continued to update it, and will continue to update this as we go along. I think Barb Smith mentioned recently that Chesterfield County had updated Turner Road and made that into a 2-mile bicycle buffered bike lanes. So we've got that kind of documentation in here as well. So we're trying to continue to update this as we go. So, but I just wanted to, I'll just take one locality, Ashland in particular, kind of encompasses a little bit of everything that we're trying to do. And so, like I say, we've been meeting with each of the localities. Fortunately, we were able to do that before all of the COVID-19 shutdown. But as we went to each locality, we will continue to work with them to revise the needs for each of those localities and how they connect, you know, the regional priorities between each of the localities. But as we, hopefully this is going to be done building here, but for each of these localities, the tabs you see across the top, Richmond, Ashland, and so on, we've gathered that GIS, and we have marked here their bicycle and pedestrian networks. So as I click down here, this is pedestrian facilities. These are all the sidewalks within the town of Ashland. They have their bicycle facilities, which you can see in that northeastern corner here. This is actually within a park. Many of these other lanes are on-road facilities, or a few that are within parks down in Carter Park, you know, and North, I think it's North Run Park, along, you know, the southern part of the county. We have, I'm sorry, the town. We have regional bike connections, which Ashland happens to have US Bike Route 1, US Bike Route 76, and the East Coast Greenway come through. And for future routes, Ashland does have that as well. We have, it's kind of hard to see here, but this little dotted green line is the Ashland and Petersburg Trail, the Trolley Line Trail that we've been working on regionally. And so, you know, we have all of that for each locality where there is any kind of regional connection as well. Also for each locality, we have pedestrian injuries and fatalities. This one in particular, you can see the gray dots are injuries. There are, within this reporting period of January 2013 to May 2019, we don't have any fatalities, fortunately, but under the cyclist tab, there is actually one fatality in that area. Like I said, this is through May 2019. We do plan to update this as well very soon. So it's part of our process. The last thing I want to show you on this map is the needs. And, you know, as I say, we've been working with all the localities and trying to ascertain, you know, whatever your priorities might be as we go along regionally. And so again, this is part of that 2040, I'm sorry, Connect RVA 2045 effort. And as Sulab was talking about the wiki map and the public comments period, we still have that map available to give us feedback, you know, for any bicycle and pedestrian need within the region. This particular map is reflecting the comments that we received up until May. But as we continue to receive comments, you know, into that, we'll continue to update it on this particular map. It's broken down into bicycle and pedestrian needs. That's the two different colors. And, you know, some of these, we've got this item out here in Goochland, you know, fill in the gaps in the Goochland Courthouse sidewalk network. There's several items like this that were entered from our steering committee feedbacks, from, you know, various meetings we've attended, or just general public comments we received. So, but as I say, you know, we've had this map out for a while, and we're going to continue to update this. So, and we did provide this link in your agenda package. So please take time to review it, and, you know, get back in touch with me with any kind of questions you may have. So I want to go on to our complete streets, and with this one, this is another that we've been developing and working on for a long time. This is a result of our efforts with Smart Growth for America, or excuse me, Smart Growth America, and Michael Baker. And we, you know, chose the town of Ashland as our pilot. I won't get into, you know, too many finer points of this document and the story map, but, you know, we've all discussed what complete streets are, but we provide a good explainer on what it is. And as you scroll through here, we've got all kinds of examples of, you know, complete streets, why you would want them. But I wanted to get in, I'm running low on time here. I wanted to get into our pilot project with Ashland. We did this time last year, had a series of workshops in the town of Ashland with Smart Growth America and Michael Baker. And that effort, you know, we you know, made some little group walks around the town, gathered photos over the past year of different infrastructure that is either deficient or that we thought was, you know, good examples of complete streets. We've done little, you know, small area projects and so on, studying this. And as a result, here's one thing that I think Ashland did that, you know, was very positive in this complete streets effort. Back in May, they started their I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of it. The parking to patio initiative. And so they closed down parts of Railroad Avenue to basically allow more spacing for social distancing during this pandemic. Allowed some of the restaurants to have outdoor seating, allowed for everyone to be able to walk by without getting too close to each other, but still being able to use some of that space where you're in a low traffic area, and it's a particular time when there's less people driving around anyway, as they're trying to stay home more. So that Safe Streets parking to patio effort really was beneficial, I think, to Ashland and their businesses to be able to be open for a while and use that space, repurpose that space during this time. So through that effort with the workshops, we developed some recommendations, and this tab covers some of those between form-based codes, roadway reconfigurations, or road diets, as more people may be familiar with, recommendations from the Federal Highway Administration. And as I say, we took a lot of advice from feedback from everyone who participated at the workshops, and have some recommendations as we developed. This is not complete. We're still working on the toolkit itself, but as we work through this, we have this tab, regional perspective, and this would take a long time to go through. We have a lot of different examples, but I'm pretty sure many of you have participated and seen this particular graphic, this chart that documented all of the different aspects we identified in our region that were important for complete streets. And again, appreciate everybody participating. We've used this heavily as we try to identify some of those particular needs throughout the region. And again, like I say, this could take a long time to go through, but as you scroll through, you'd be able to see a lot of the types of infrastructure. We align them with areas on the map. So it's very well done. I appreciate Dan Mata on our staff for working so hard to put this together. But that leads to some of the results in our toolkit. And again, this is heavily advised by our connections with Smart Growth America and again, those workshops. And then we are still developing some of this, and this is our story map for it, but we also will have a document that accompanies it as well. But I think that's about all the time I had, and I wanted to give anybody who had questions a chance to speak.
Anyone have questions for Phil? All right. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda are transportation agency updates. And first up is Liz with VDOT. Uh-oh, I can't hear her.
That's because I had the mute button on and was just talking away.
Okay, good. I'm glad it
that was
on
my fault. Okay, so I'll give you a quick CTB update. The last meeting, they did have May meetings. There was information presented on the state safety target, and that's something that's TAC is going to be asked to adopt 2021 safety targets later this year. There will be more information available. There's an MPO coordination meeting this week that the MPOs will get some more information, and then we'll be able to pass that information on to TAC, so that when it is time for you guys to adopt the targets, you will have the information to do so. The VTrans multimodal prioritization process was presented. There's going to be a regional virtual meeting this fall to prioritize midterm multimodal needs, and also the project pipeline, which is going to be sort of a new process of how projects get pushed into the 6-year improvement program. None of that's finalized, just kind of a heads up that we'll hear more about that later. Also, the CTB took action to cancel the Goochland County Smart Scale project, which is UPC 109313. That's the I-64 and Ashland Road interchange. Goochland was aware, and that's just sort of a formality the CTB has to do for Smart Scale projects. The next CTB meeting is going to be in June. It's not yet been announced if it'll be virtual or not. we'll let you guys know as soon as we know. There's going to be a workshop on June 16th at 10 a.m. and the action meeting will be June 17th at 9 a.m. If in fact there is a physical location, it will be at the Richmond District Office of VDOT. General Assembly, Chet pretty much already talked about the CVTA. I will skip that one. Smart Scale, I do have some more information than I had earlier this meeting, so that's good. The portal is technically open today, so you applicants can go in. However, all of the pre-screening decisions are not yet final. If you go in and there's no comments for screening, that just means that OIP hasn't hit the submit button for the final decision. I'm told that by the beginning of next week, all decisions will be final. And I've also requested from OIP, and they've agreed to provide me with a preliminary list for the Richmond district, so I can get in touch with Chet later this week to give you guys the preliminary findings, so you'll know at least what projects may be having some issues. It's my understanding that the portal deadline will still be in August 3rd at 5 p.m. But again, if that changes, I will let everyone know. SIP development, this is no change from last meeting. They're still reviewing the impacts to revenue projections based on the COVID impacts. Central office is still working on their FAQs, probably because information is still changing daily. Once they can nail that down, that'll be made public. The plan is still to have an updated SYIP toward the end of this calendar year of 2020. And again, as updates are available, I will get those out to you all. 95 corridor study, no change from last time. Still planning on taking the capital improvement recommendations to the Ctb this summer or early fall. In conjunction with that, the I-64 study. This is a change from last time. Data collection is complete. The group is currently working on improvement alternatives or potential improvement alternatives. There will still be a total of 3 rounds of public meetings. We obviously didn't have the May meeting. It's potential that we might have one in June. It will be virtual, and public comments are going to be obtained via online surveys. We've actually had really good success with the online surveys anyway, and we get a lot more public comment that way. So I see that as a good thing. The meeting schedule is to be determined within the first meeting to be held sometime this summer. Like I said, I think it's June, but it may get pushed. And as with the 95, excuse me, study, the ranked recommendations for 64 are going to be developed and taken to the CTB this fall. And there are no current public hearings or meetings right now for anything within the RRTPO study area. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Liz. I like having your thing up on the screen at the same time. It was a lot of information. Yeah. Tiffany, can you provide us your update?
Sure. So a few items from DRPT for June related to the 6-year improvement program. Liz kind of covered about General Assembly and approving the revised budget. Some main points related to transit under that third bullet. We did a briefing to the CTB in May on recommended additions to the current SIP, including the provision of operating assistance for transit agencies through the first quarter of fiscal year 21. As of right now, no transit capital assistance is being programmed at this time. We also recommended a provision of commuter assistance or TDM operating assistance at reduced levels through the first quarter of 21. A provision on section 5310 operating assistance for fiscal year 21, no 5310 capital is being programmed. And actually this morning we did send out an email to all of our human service transportation partners for a webinar updating on FTA's section 5310 program for July 13th at 1 p.m. And I'd be glad to be able to forward that to Chet or Nicole to distribute for anyone who would like to attend that webinar. In addition, we did provide provision for 5303 transit planning assistance for fiscal year 21. As of right now, we believe that to be still effective July 1st. So we haven't heard any delays related to that. Right now, we as an agency are evaluating allocations based on what revenue projections and agency needs we know. So we hope to have that finalized in September. Kind of some information about Amtrak. And right now, Amtrak Virginia is running limited service, and state-supported ridership right now is down over 95%. Since April 1st, they've been operating under the following schedule: think I mentioned this last month too, about Roanoke and Norfolk having one daily round trip service, same with Newport News. Richmond is having currently no service. However, Staples Mill and Main Street are being serviced by through train service from the National Routes and Hampton Roads trains. Last is about Virginia Breeze. We've had all service suspended since effective April 10th. We do have a contract for 2 new services, so we have selected a vendor. So we hope that based off of how reopenings are happening, especially with the universities, we are currently figuring out the timeline of when we will reopen at least the main service on 81, followed by the 2 new services. Let's see, yeah, late July. So we're expecting service to anticipate a restart for the Blacksburg to DC route that we've labeled the Valley Flyer in late July. 2 new routes beginning early August. Of course, this is all fluctuating based off of COVID-19. So if there are any changes, we'll be sure to let everyone know. And that is all I have for my report.
Thanks, Tiffany. Any questions? All right. Next on the agenda is the public comment period. Have we gotten any comments in the chat?
No, ma'am, I don't think so.
Okay. Is anyone on the line that has a comment? So next we'll move on to item 14, future meeting topics. We talked about the vision plan update, complete streets toolbox, V-Trans update, and the TPO prioritization process. More on the authority, of course, and the long range plan and bike ped plan updates. So there's always something to do, which is good.
Yes, and just a reminder, based on earlier business, we're going to schedule a special meeting for the discussion of the smart scale applications. So that needs to be added here, I guess, as well.
Right. Yep. Thank you. Do any of the TAC members have comments? All right. Well, our next meeting is really going to be that special meeting, which will hopefully happen before July 14th. But we'll also plan on meeting on July 14th. I want to remind everybody to get comments to Miles on the CMAQ RSTP allocations. Those are due on the 19th. And otherwise, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.